I, just like most of you, have been absolutely obsessed with Pokopia over the past 2 weeks, and the wheels in my head have been turning. What if Ditto was added as the next playable Pokemon in the next Super Smash Bros. Game? I can't stop speculating about it, so let's touch base. But before we get started with today's episode of Touch Base, I need to give a quick shout out to my amazing sponsors for today's video, the team over at Konami, to celebrate their upcoming release of the new game, Darwin's Paradox. Now, if you're familiar with my channel at all, you know I'm a huge fan of stealth action games like Metal Gear, while at the same time, I also love a good retro puzzle platformer. And Darwin's Paradox kind of mashes both of these two together in a really fun, cohesive, and cute little game. You play as an octopus named Darwin, and if you have any chance of surviving the adventure, you have to think like an octopus. You're going to want to utilize all of his special abilities to ink your way out of danger, sneak past enemies by using your camouflage, use that squishy little octopus body of yours to sneak into tight crevices, stick to the walls and climb up caverns, and so much more. Of course, my favorite thing about the game were the environmental puzzles, and we're actually going to talk at length about my time with the game during the Roger Roundup a little bit later on during today's episode. Darwin's Paradox releases on April 2nd, just under a week from now, for Nintendo Switch 2, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, Steam, and the Epic Games Store. And if you're at all interested in the game, there is also a demo out right now so you can play it for yourself, and you can get to that demo by clicking the link in my description below. Once again, massive thank you to the team at Konami for sponsoring today's Touch Base, and if you want some exclusive gameplay footage of my time with the game, make sure to check out the Roger Roundup a little bit later on today. But with all that being said, let's dive right into the main discussion topic for this week's episode of Touch Base, and I am supremely excited to talk about this one. That is my speculation on the potential for Ditto as a playable character in the next Super Smash Bros. Now, right at the top of this video, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Roger, how could you possibly speculate on a character in a game that we don't even know exists yet? Hell, Sakurai said that Smash Ultimate was going to be the last Smash Bros. Game. Yeah, you know what else Sakurai said that about? Smash Brawl, Smash Melee, Smash 4. He says it on every Smash game he ever works on, that game is going to be the last Smash Brothers game that he works on. Additionally, don't you think it's a little weird that the last game that Sakurai worked on, Kirby Air Riders, he went out of his way to say the game is not going to get any DLC, that he's moving on to the next thing? Don't you think it's weird that there are two teams at Bandai Namco working on first-party Nintendo games, Team S and Team A, that Team A we now know was working on Air Riders, and Team S is apparently working on some type of 2D game for a Nintendo platform? I wonder. I mean, Bandai Namco, it's not like they've been working on the last two Smash Brothers games. The signs are there, right? We are probably going to get some type of Smash project, even if it is a Switch 2 edition of Ultimate, even if it's a reboot, even if Sakurai's not directing it. Smash is coming, hell or high water, probably within the next 2 years. And if that's the case, the hype cycle for the next game is going to have to start sooner rather than later. So I feel like now is as good a time as any to start speculating on characters. But Roger, Pokopia is just too new. There's no way they're going to include anything from Pokopia in the next Smash Brothers game. I'm sure the proposal for that game had to be submitted a long time ago. Well, let me also tell you something, all right? We have now found out, since Pokopia has been released, that is one of the Switch 2 games that was in development the longest. Meaning that if you expect any music from Mario Kart World in the next Smash, if you expect any sort of overhaul for Donkey Kong, or anything from Donkey Kong Bonanza in the next Smash Brothers game, then Pokemon Pokopia is fair game too. And considering the fact that we now know that Pokemon Pokopia in the first 4 days of sales sold 2.2 million copies, which, to put that in perspective, right, in the same time frame, Mario Odyssey on Switch 1 sold 2 million copies, all right? Mario, and this is a spin-off Pokemon game. This isn't a mainline Pokemon game. This is a spin-off cozy Pokemon game. Now, I don't know, and I can't speculate on whether or not Nintendo and Pokemon Company presumed that Pokemon Pokopia would be as big of a deal and as big of a seller as it actually was. But I have to assume they probably did. They knew that this was going to be big. And right from the get-go, from the very first trailer of Pokopia, when we saw it in that Nintendo Direct last year, I said this.
I need to say it, Ditto for Smash. Ditto for Smash. No.
From the moment that I saw a humanoid Ditto transforming its limbs into other popular Pokemon, I realized that it would be the absolute perfect next playable character in Smash. Smash is a celebration of all things gaming, and what better celebration of all the Pokemon than one that could transform into all of them? And I hear you Meowscarada fans, I know there's a lot of people going, but it's Meowscarada's time! We had Greninja, we had Incineroar, we need to complete the trinity of fire, water, and grass for the next Smash game. Scarlet and Violet was obviously out by the time the proposal would have gone out for the last Smash Brothers game, and you're totally right, but also my argument to you is why not both, right? There's absolutely potential considering what a big franchise Pokemon is, especially considering how different the characters could play, to have both Ditto and Meowscarada. However, if you're asking me personally, I would rather have Ditto. And to add another layer to this Ditto Smash Brothers talk, something that many of you might not even realize is that Sakurai has been thinking about implementing Ditto into the gameplay of Smash Brothers ever since Super Smash Brothers Melee. Many of you might be too young to remember this, but I have my original player's guide for Smash Melee right here. And if you turn to page 107, you'll actually see a Pokeball description for Ditto. Ditto was meant to be a Pokeball Pokemon, just like they are now in Smash Bros. Ultimate, where they transform into the person that summoned them and then fights alongside them, but they ended up having to cut it from development once that game eventually went to print. However, it is now present in Ultimate, and I know there's a lot of people who are going, well, if it's a Pokeball Pokemon, there's no way that it can be playable. My argument to you would be on page 106 of the same player's guide, where you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner, a little guy named Charizard. You know who's been playable in Smash Brothers ever since Smash 4, who evolved, no pun intended, from being a Pokeball Pokemon into a playable Pokemon? Charizard. Now, if after all that you still don't think there's at least a slight chance that Ditto could potentially be in the next Smash Brothers game, I don't know what to tell you. But for this next portion of today's episode, I am actually going to be talking about all of the different moves that Ditto could have if they were playable. I'm talking about the smash moves, the special moves, throws, taunts, everything, you name it. And I'm going to use Pokemon Pokopia to do it. Alright, so here we are. We've made it to my pallet town of Pokopia, and I'm about to show you all what I think Ditto's moves would look like in Smash Brothers. Now, let's start with a very obvious one, right? The jab. This makes a lot of sense to me. You would just do Rock Smash as the jab. This would be similar to Villagers' punches. You just have a single tap to do one punch and obviously hold it down to do multiple. The other very basic thing I want to talk about with Ditto are Ditto's jumps. I actually think Ditto's jumps would work in Smash Brothers the exact same way that they work in Pokopia. You would have your first initial jump, but on your double jump, you would transform into Dragonite and be able to float around in mid-air. I think this would work very similar to Peach's jump already. The only difference being Peach, when you're floating in midair, you sort of stay at the same level. I think slowly but surely you would have Dragonite descend back to Earth. Next up, we've got Ditto's smash attacks. I think the forward smash would definitely be cut. You would just tap the C-stick and be able to do a quick slice. However, if you charge it up all the way, you would be able to shoot out a projectile. I think this would be a really versatile, really obvious move for Ditto. Another pretty obvious one for me would be Ditto's potential down smash, with that move being Leafage. Obviously, you tap the C-stick, Ditto would slam their vine arms into the ground and then pop up a little patch of grass that would launch opponents up in the sky. However, much like Cut, if you hold it down and charge it all the way, you would create an even bigger patch of grass that would do even more damage. And when I was thinking about what Ditto's up smash could be in the game, I actually ended up landing on Camouflage. I think this would be a great way to showcase all the different dolls and all the different distinctive items from Pokopia, while at the same time making a lot of sense as an attack, because Ditto, during the actual charge of the attack, would camouflage into a variety of different items, and then once you're ready to unleash the attack, you would undo the transformation and Ditto would pop up in the sky and attack opponents. And finally, I think Ditto's tilts could take advantage of Water Gun, where depending on where you're actually aiming the tilt, you would shoot Water Gun in that direction. So now let's talk about Ditto's special moves, and I thought really long and hard about these, and I'm actually really happy with what I came up with. For the standard B, the standard special, I'm going with Stockpile, and it's going to work very similar to how it works in Pokopia. Obviously in Pokopia you can stockpile different items and eventually spit them back up, so right here I've got a windmill kit, but in Smash Brothers the way this would work is Ditto would be able to actually suck up items that were on the stage and stockpile up to 5 of them to be able to launch them back out at opponents willy-nilly. Next up, for Ditto's side special, I'm very clearly going with Rollout. Really, when I was putting together this moveset, there was nothing else I even thought of for side special. I just thought Rollout made so much sense. This is a powerful, quick move in which Ditto would transform into Graveler and move horizontally side to side in one direction, bulldozing through opponents. And I actually think Rollout has a really good opportunity for some horizontal recovery in the air as well. So say, for example, you jump and then double jump and transform into Dragonite, and you're floating back to the stage, but you don't quite think you're going to make it, you'd be able to activate Rollout mid-air, kind of similar to Jigglypuff's standard B, and finally make your way back to the stage. Now, when talking about Ditto's recovery, I actually really struggled with the up special because there are so many good options. Obviously, we already brought up Dragonite being the second jump, where you'd be able to float around the stage and gently glide, but I didn't want to use Dragonite for the recovery because I do think there are actually two better options. The first of which is a little bit of a spoiler, so if you care about moveset spoilers for Pokopia, I would say just skip ahead. I'll put a little bit of a spoiler warning over the image that's on screen, and this is the one that I actually think is a more OP and more broken recovery. All right, I'm gonna give you 3, 2, 1. For this first option, I'm going with Magnet Rise, in which Ditto would be able to transform into Magnemite and slowly but surely make their way through the air and fly for a limited amount of time. Now, while Magnemite is in the air, Magnemite's going to emit a little bit of electricity, so any opponent that would run into Magnemite would actually get shocked a little bit. I just think this would be a really, really broken recovery when paired with both Dragonite and the Rollout that I explained earlier. So that's the reason why I went with a secondary idea for the up special, and that is Drifloon. Now, for anyone familiar with Pokopia, you know that you can visit a dream island by calling your buddy Drifloon, and the animation that plays when Drifloon takes you to that dream island is actually perfect for recovery. Now, again, I think this would work kind of similar to another existing character in Smash Brothers. I feel like Drifloon would work very similarly to Isabelle's floating balloon recovery as well. And I mean, just look at how cute that animation is. How could you not utilize little Ditto hanging for dear life on a Drifloon floating through the sky? And finally, there's a reason I saved this one for last. Ditto's down special, I believe, would be Rototiller, in which Ditto would swing their arms around wildly like a drill burr and create a patch of grass that you would be able to plant crops in. And similar to Villager's watering can, Ditto would then use Water Gun to grow the crops, which could then be eaten to restore PP. Come on, you thought I wasn't going to give a meter to Ditto? Now, when Ditto is at full PP, all of its moves not only are powered up, but many of them have different properties. For example, the standard jab would break through shields even faster. Rollout would be able to chew through opponent shields with ease. Ditto's recovery would last longer in the air. And most importantly, when Ditto's PP meter is at max, Stockpile and Spit Up actually has a new property. Now, normally, if you're just running around the stage and you don't have max PP, you'll be able to suck up items and spit opponents back out. However, hey, what's going on, Gimme Ghoul? When you have a full PP meter, you can actually suck up opponents and transform into them. This transformation into the opponent would of course come complete with a Ditto face and would last as long as your PP meter has PP in it. However, say for example your meter runs out, your transformation is going to end and you're going to have to grow more crops to get your PP back. Additionally, in case I wasn't clear, the transformation into your opponent, the enhanced version of Rollout or Rock Smash, all of those moves would naturally drain your PP meter. So while playing as Ditto, you're really going to want to manage your time between growing crops to build up your PP meter, utilizing those powerful PP boosted moves, and of course taking advantage of your great recovery. Now, as for Ditto's aerials, I think this would be a great opportunity to highlight some of the other iconic NPC Pokemon from Pokopia, in which Ditto can transform into them briefly and do an attack. Forward air could have Ditto very briefly transforming into Chef Dente and smacking them with a frying pan. Up air would transform you into Engineer Tinkaton with an upward swing of your hammer. Back air would transform you into Pikachu, and since Pikachu doesn't have electricity, this would be a cute little kick that would also make Ditto Pikachu glow. And then finally, the down air would be a transformation into Mosslax that would very quickly slam you onto the stage and be able to spike opponents. And finally, Ditto's throws would see Ditto transforming into Professor Tangrowth and smacking opponents with Tangrowth's little teaching stick to do a little bit of chip damage before you decide which direction to throw the opponent with Tangrowth's vines. And as for Ditto's taunts, I think there's some very obvious ones here with Ditto's emotes from Pokopia. Celebrate would naturally be the up taunt. I think Goodbye would make for a really cute side taunt of like, see you later, buddy, I killed ya. And then finally, the down taunt being a bow, I think could be really cute as well. And finally, that will bring me to Ditto's final smash. And this final smash, much like Cloud's, will actually actually differ depending on the opponent. Now, normally, Ditto's final smash is going to be Transform, in which it utilizes the final smash of whoever the last opponent was that got KO'd. However, if you are fighting against another Ditto, if you have a one-on-one Ditto with Ditto, or the last person that you KO'd was Ditto, Ditto's final smash changes to blasting off again. Here's another spoiler warning, by the way. If you don't want to know something that happens towards the end of Pokopia before you roll the credits, I would skip ahead about like 20 seconds. With blasting off again, Ditto stockpiles up the opponent, spits them up inside a Team R's rocket ship, and shoots them up into outer space, never to be seen again. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the potential implementation for Ditto as a playable character in the next Super Smash Bros. Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on whether or not you agree with my moveset, or if there's something you would swap out with a different ability. I would love to hear it. Again, I love Smash Bros. Speculation. I just want to say at the end of all this that, like, genuinely, I am in love with Pokopia. This game has been so much fun, both to stream and to play on my own, and so many other people in my life are also obsessed with it right now. So I really do think it would be silly to not include anything from Pokopia in the next Smash Brothers. And honestly, I think it is pretty much a lock at this point. Now, with so much talk about Smash Brothers on this week's show, I figured this would be the perfect opportunity to finally ask this question to all of you. So, this week's member poll question is, if you could choose one character currently on the Super Smash Bros. Roster to get a revised moveset for the next game, which character would it be and why? I will read out some of the best responses on next week's episode of the show. But I want to bring this up right now too. I want to reveal the answers to last week's member poll question. Last week I asked, which series would you like to see me make content on one day? And I gave you 3 options: Kingdom, Dragon Ball, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. This was a multiple choice question, and I was honestly really surprised by how split the vote was. Now, the winner, pretty much by a wide amount, was Dragon Ball at 45% of the vote. But I will say, more members voted on this member poll than on any other member poll that I have done so far this year on TouchBase. 139 different members weighed in their opinions for this one. Kingdom got 20% of the vote. That's not a huge surprise. That series is massive in Japan and has a big audience here on manga YouTube. But I do feel like, on the whole, that is more of a niche franchise here in North America, despite the fact that it has an official release. Dragon Ball, again, got 45% of the vote. But coming in second with a pretty substantial amount of the votes was JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Now, this was bizarre to me, mostly due to the fact, no pun intended, by the way, I realized I just said bizarre, due to the fact that I watched a lot of JoJo Part 4 on stream, and I pretty openly was like, I did not enjoy this. Now, with that being said, I know if I ever went back to watch the rest of Part 4 so I could finally watch Part 5, I would probably really like Part 5. I like everything I've heard about it with Giorno in Italy. I just know it would very much be my vibe, but I don't know, the Suburbia Kira stuff in Part 4 just like did not resonate with me. So I'm taking all this into consideration, and I did think it was interesting that a lot of people do want to see me make Dragon Ball content one day, so who knows, maybe when we got a little bit of a lull and there's not as many games to play or things to talk about, I might dip my toe back into Dragon Ball. Now, obviously, we spent a lot of time on this week's show talking about Pokopia, and I've been streaming a lot of Pokopia, though honestly not as much as I would have wanted. I've been very, very busy this week, so I'm going to spend the majority of this week's Roger Roundup once again talking about my time with Darwin's Paradox. Not only did Konami provide me with a review code, not only did they sponsor this week's episode of TouchBase, but I also had the opportunity a couple weeks back to actually preview the game for myself at Konami headquarters. Now, a couple quick things to note right at the very beginning of this preview. First off, all the footage that you're seeing here today was captured by me during that preview session at Konami off of a PC. So the version that you're seeing in today's preview is the PC version of the game, but it's also important to note that my preview was quite a few weeks back, and so it may not necessarily be indicative of what the final game is going to look like. And the other second thing that I want to bring up is that the review copy that they sent over for me is the Nintendo Switch 2 version of the game, which obviously I special requested because I want to play this game on a Switch 2. Everything that I've seen of Darwin's Paradox, everything I've played of Darwin's Paradox tells me that I would absolutely enjoy playing this in handheld mode while cozying up on the couch or laying in bed. And I gotta say, the very first thing that impressed me when I started playing the game was its sense of humor, which I know is a very strange thing to bring up when the game is like a stealth puzzle platformer type game, but right from the get-go, you are treated to this little opening story cutscene that is very funny, and right from the very first time that you can play as Darwin, if you choose to go left instead of going right on the screen, something happens which I will not spoil here, but I feel like that absolutely set the tone for the rest of my time with the game, and I absolutely loved it. And something else that really stood out to me during my time with the game was its difficulty level. I feel like this hits a really nice sweet spot between being challenging but never really being frustrating. There were a couple puzzles, I will be honest, that I was really struggling with, but once I eventually solved them, it was incredibly satisfying. And the same thing goes with some of the platforming segments. There was one where I had to stick to walls, climb up things, and make some death-defying jumps, and you guys know me. I am not a platformer type person. I like puzzle platformers. I like my Metroids and my Castlevanias, but I'm not somebody who likes making death-defying jumps, and yet it was really satisfying and really fun due to the physics of Darwin himself. I think like controlling an octopus feels exactly as you would imagine controlling an octopus would feel like. The stickiness, right? The goopiness of moving around the stage, utilizing that ink to dash away from opponents. You really do feel like you're playing like an octopus, and you do, like I brought up earlier in the video, have to think like one to solve some of these puzzles. And really, so far, the only concern that I have with the game so far was with the underwater ink segments. There's a certain portion of the game that I played in which you have to shoot out ink and then try to hide from this eel that's in the background so it doesn't eat you. And I feel like the way that the ink was dissipating and the timing for me flying through the ink felt a little finicky. It didn't really feel as precise as the other controls felt. I feel like the controls in the entire game feel purposefully a little clunky, and that is a good thing when you are climbing through certain segments in the cavern or like you're making the jumps, because again, the jumps have the stickiness of being an octopus. But I feel like, ironically enough, when you're underwater and swimming, that was when I felt I really didn't have full control of Darwin. But again, a lot of that might have just been due to the fact that like I picked up the game for the first time during the demo, and I might not necessarily feel that once I actually start my full playthrough. Something else I was actually really impressed by were the visuals in the game. I feel like just within that hour and a half that I had the chance to demo, I had so many different areas that I was exploring. Again, there was like a factory portion. I was in a garbage dump at one point, an underwater cavern where everything was glowing green. I was running away from a fish. The underwater portion looked really good as well, with the light shining through the surface of the water. Just the lighting effects in general I thought looked really nice. There's some awesome particle effects in that factory section. And overall, yeah, I just really liked the way the game looked, which again, isn't super important to me for when I'm playing like a puzzle platformer or a semi 2D type of game like this, but man, it really stood out and it made the game feel really quality. So overall, I have really enjoyed my time with Darwin's Paradox so far, and again, massive thank you to Konami, not just for sponsoring the video, but for sending over that review copy, because I will be playing it and probably streaming it in the coming weeks, so you can look forward to more impressions from me, and maybe even a review of Darwin's Paradox a little bit later on. And finally, that will bring us to our viewer question segment for this week's show. And as always, if you're a member at the Nakama tier and up, make sure to take advantage of those member benefits and submit questions for the show, and you just might hear your answers on the next episode. Now, with that being said, we didn't get that many questions this week, so I feel like this should be pretty cut and dry, but I do think there are some interesting discussion topics. This first one comes from DGC. As always, every week, I love seeing DGC in these viewer questions saying, what are some moments from throughout different forms of media that got to you emotionally? And I wanted to start with this one because something major happened here on the YouTube channel since the last episode of TouchBase, and that is I did a repost of my live reaction to the very first ever trailer for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Mind you, this was not the Everyone Is Here trailer. This was the very first trailer that got shown in that Nintendo Direct after the segment where we all thought it was going to be a Splatoon game, but I, knowing that Smash was around the corner and knowing that they just shown us stuff with Splatoon 2, just assumed that we were going to get something related to Smash Brothers, or at the very least, inkling in Smash. At the time, we didn't even know that it was going to be a new Smash game. There were rumors, if I could take you back to that time, where a lot of people assumed that Smash 4 was actually going to get ported with new DLC. And the reason that I bring that up related to this question is I've talked at great length on multiple shows about moments in movies or TV that have affected me emotionally, or even in video games, but I haven't really talked about trailers that have affected me emotionally that aren't just related to movies movies or TV. And I feel like that Smash Brothers trailer in particular really moved me. I mean, it's so fun to like look at the comments of that now. First off, people realizing that that trailer was released 8 years ago, which is insane to think about, but also to see so many people reminiscing with me in the comments section. Of course, you're getting the comments of like, grown man, by the way, I can't believe he's reacting like this to a video game, which, you know what, very valid. But also there's a lot of people commenting who are like, bro, you don't understand. It really was that serious at the time. We were craving a Smash Brothers game, and that trailer, the way that Sakurai laid everything out, where you see the inklings, you really think it could be a Splatoon announcement, and then you see the silhouettes of the characters with the giant fiery Smash logo in the back. It was just peak. It was peak gaming, and hopefully we are due for another Smash cycle, and we're going to get a new Smash game soon, so I could lose my mind and get emotional over the next Smash Brothers game. So, as always, thank you for your question, DGC. The next one comes from Olaman, who said, Roger, and this is actually related to the last thing I talked about. When seeing news and trailers for upcoming games and movies, do you usually watch or follow all the media content up until release? Or do you stop checking news updates after a while after you've decided that you are definitely going to play it or watch it to keep things a surprise and be as spoiler-free as possible? This is a weird one for me because on one hand, if it's something that's directly related to my audience, if it's like a video game, for example, specifically a first-party Nintendo game, I usually do watch every trailer and watch every direct. One, because it's content that I know people are going to want to see. I naturally have big reactions to Nintendo content, but also because I'm not somebody that really worries about spoilers in video games unless it's like a narrative spoiler. I'm one of those people who a lot of the time going into like a new generation of Pokemon wants to know what Pokemon are in the game so I could plan out my team, which I know not a lot of people like to do. And there was a brief period of time with like Scarlet and Violet where we got a lot of trailers, but then right before that game's release, there was still kind of a lot of stuff that was up in the air that people didn't know about. So it was fun making my way through and streaming that game and then getting to like Relor, for example, who's the little dung beetle Pokemon, and not even knowing that he was going to be in the game and having that great moment of discovery on stream with my audience. That's awesome. And I always want to capture that. Now, when it comes to something like something narrative driven, something like manga or an anime or something, that I do absolutely try to be as spoiler-free as possible. And actually, I think One Piece is a great example of this, right? We just had the live-action series, and I watched the first trailer for that, but I actually, knowing that I probably couldn't upload other trailers due to copyright issues, didn't watch a lot of the other trailers before watching the new season of the live-action, because I wanted to be surprised with how they adapted certain things. So, again, it really heavily depends on what the thing is. With games, I'm usually, like, totally fine with seeing spoiler stuff so long as it's not narrative-based. But with movies or TV shows and things like that, I do try to keep as spoiler-free as possible. And obviously, you know, this carries over to my anime and manga content too when I'm doing my weekly read-throughs, because more than anything, I like to remain unspoiled for new One Piece chapters. Of course, there's people who want to talk about it when the scans or the spoilers drop or whatever, and like, can you believe this character has this devil fruit, or can you believe this character does something? But that does take away something for me in terms of when I'm reacting on stream. People I know naturally want to see my reactions, and I have always prided myself on the fact that my reactions are genuine, right? If I get spoiled on something, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be like, I'm sorry, I got spoiled this week. It is what it is. Let's read this anyway and enjoy it. But I like going in not knowing things. Again, when it is narrative driven or something that I think could make for a good reaction video. And of course, with something like a Nintendo Direct, I never watch any of those ahead of time. That's why I live stream them as they drop. That's why I wake up at 5 in the morning to watch a Nintendo Direct, because I don't want to see it afterwards. I want to experience live with all of you, all that hype and all that excitement. So that's my answer to that question. Thank you very much for that, Olaman. The next one, also video game related, comes from longtime member Stephen Dog, who says, do you think Animal Crossing should take inspiration from Pokopia or a future game by expanding on the life sim concept with different biomes and new ways to explore areas beyond the island? Or should they keep it simple and maintain the classic charm that fans love about the series? Now, I have been playing a lot of Pokopia over the course of the past week. I believe I've already clocked in over the course of the last 2 weeks about 70 hours in that game. I adore it. And obviously, if you're familiar with my content at all, you know I am a massive Animal Crossing fan. So I do feel uniquely qualified to answer this and say what I want carried over and what I don't. I think one thing that I really love about Pokopia, which I was missing from the newest Animal Crossing, is that all of the Pokemon really do feel like they have distinct personalities in this one. You can see some cracks in the armor through certain lines of dialogue where it's clear that they program certain things for other Pokemon, or like they repeat certain lines. So like Trubbish and Magikarp both use yo when they're speaking. It's like little things like that. But for the most part, every Pokemon really does have their own personality and their own unique way that they interact with other Pokemon. Whereas in Animal Crossing, a little bit of inside baseball, but like there's basically character archetypes. I think there's like 6 to 8 of them or something, right? And every character follows that type of character archetype. So if you have a bunch of jock villagers in your town, or like sassy villagers or whatever they call them, right? Like they're all going to speak in the same manner. And that is absolutely something that takes you out of it a little bit when the dialogue in recent Animal Crossing games has become as sanitized as it is. And that's understandable, right? They want the game accessible for everybody. They don't want little kids crying that Tangy the cat called them ugly, right? But like at the same time, that was the charm of something like the GameCube Animal Crossing. I liked logging in and having my villagers be like, "Oh, did you shower today? Why do you smell?" Or like all those goofy little interactions are what made that original Animal Crossing so fun, where like you'd go to the dump and get an outfit and then talk to your villager and they'd say you smell. Like little things like that I am missing from modern Animal Crossing games, and I feel like Pokopia absolutely does like scratch that itch. I think there's a lot of things that happen in Pokopia when I'm playing, especially for like an extended period of time, where a character will say something, and already, even if I'm not super paying attention to like who it was that was talking, if I'm in a group of like 5 other Pokemon, I'll know right away like, oh, that was Squavit or that was Magby, just based on the way they're speaking. Like Magmar, for example, I think it's so funny how the Pokemon don't evolve in Pokopia, right? There's like different Pokemon, but there's evolutions of the same evolution line. I like how Magby is kind of like a bold little guy. When he's like burning up all your materials and making bricks for you, he's kind of bold. But once he has Magmar, or you at least unlock Magmar, I keep wanting to say once he evolves, but he doesn't evolve. Once you discover Magmar, you kind of see in Magmar's personality that he's gotten kind of shy. He starts stuttering and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'll do this for you if you want me to." Or like, another great example of this is Paris and Parasect. I feel like when you meet Paris for the first time, and again, this is uniquely Pokemon, so I don't know how this would carry over to something like Animal Crossing. The Pokedex entry for Paris and for Parasect is always very strange, right? It's like the mushrooms, the parasite in the mushroom on Paris's back is essentially taking over Paris. So by the time he's Parasect and his eyes are whited out, he's basically like a Last of Us zombie, right? And the way that they translated that in Pokopia, when you're talking to Paris and then you're in the middle of doing a little errand and Paris says to you like, "Oh, my mushrooms are feeling kind of heavy today. I don't know what that's about." And then you find Parasect, and Parasect is talking super monotone and just with basic sentences and little periods at the end, you're like, "Oh my gosh, Paris is gone. Parasect has been taken over." That type of stuff I absolutely love. And again, that stuff is there in Animal Crossing for like your major NPCs, right? Tom Nook speaks differently from Cap'n, who speaks differently from like Mabel and Sable and the Able sisters. But the actual villagers themselves, of which you're spending the majority of the time in those games, again, they have certain archetypes that they're speaking as. And you just kind of know once you played for a long period of time, like, oh, I know what your deal is. You're not going to say anything that's going to surprise me. Whereas every moment in which I'm playing Pokopia, still, all these weeks later, the characters and the Pokemon are saying things that surprise me. And that's an aspect of the game that I really like. Again, though, to answer your specific question, Stefan, I don't know how that would carry over to the next Animal Crossing. In terms of what I want from that game, you were mentioning biomes. I do like the idea of having like the beach or having the Skyland area in Pokopia, but I don't really want multiple towns to manage. I think back to when City Folk first got announced, Animal Crossing City Folk on the Wii, and just ideating on like what that could be, having an Animal Crossing game based in the city where you could have your friends in a skyscraper, or like have villagers move into skyscrapers and have shops on different levels. And ultimately it just turned out to be like one city block with little shops in it, which of course was cute and enjoyable, but that's not what I wanted when I wanted like a city Animal Crossing game. So I think the only thing that I could speak to in terms of having separated areas in the next game is I would like to have something that's more of like your traditional kind of forest area of Animal Crossing, or your tropical island area of Animal Crossing, or like how Happy Home Paradise was, where you had the separated Happy Home Paradise area where you're making all the rental homes for the different villagers. That was great, but I really am craving something that is like city related with Animal Crossing, where you're in a more urban environment with like cars and subway stations and like giant skyscrapers. I think that's something that could really differentiate the next Animal Crossing game from all the ones that came before it, and also kind of utilize that idea of going to different locations that's obviously so prevalent in Pokopia. So great question, Stefan Dog. I hope I answered it correctly. And finally, the last question this week comes from longtime member Clax, who said, super simple question this time. When playing a game in handheld mode on Switch 2 or on Switch, do you feel it's easier to control your character than while playing the same game on a different home console, like say PS5? Or even more control than playing when the game is docked? Try it with a game that's multi-platform, maybe Final Fantasy VII Remake, and tell me what you think. For me personally, when I play a game handheld, it does feel like I have an easier time doing precise movements, and I'm not quite sure why or if it's just me. Clax, I will tell you, you are not alone. In fact, I booted up Final Fantasy VII Remake on my Switch 2, which obviously I've spent a lot of time playing that game on PS5, by the way. Full playthrough over on the VOD channel. Go check that out if you haven't already. And I will say, I absolutely love the way that Final Fantasy VII controls in handheld mode. I am somebody who primarily plays in handheld mode. I have a great setup over here, in my main living room. I have a great setup for my streams as well, my 4K monitor, my giant TV, but there is just something different about sitting on your couch, having the screen this close to your face and playing in handheld mode. It's cozy. Also, I don't know if this speaks to the control thing that you brought up, but there is just something nice about playing something, especially something that's not narrative driven, something that's more chill like a Suika game or a Pokopia or an Animal Crossing along those lines, and like watching TV while you're playing. I think having those types of games that you can play while you're watching something or enjoying a different type of entertainment are really, really nice, specifically in handheld mode. Now, again, going back to what you were talking about in terms of actual control, like how different a game feels in handheld mode, I usually don't notice it all that much. The only time I ever do is if I button map with different controllers. So for example, like if I'm using a Pro controller, this over here is, this isn't even the Resident Evil Requiem one. This is the regular Switch Pro controller. But like if I'm playing with the Pro controller and I've mapped the buttons differently, and then I'm playing in handheld mode and I don't remember where the buttons are, usually I will just not play that game in handheld mode. I will just play that game in docked mode. But if I'm used to playing a lot of a game in handheld mode, that's a big reason as to why when like I'm doing a stream or something, I'll just use my Joy-Cons, because I'm already kind of like instinctively used to where the buttons go and how it feels in the palm of my hand. So yeah, I also agree that things do feel a little more tactile and a little more precise when I'm playing things in handheld mode versus the TV, but I don't think that has anything to do with the game itself, and it's more like a personal thing because I like playing games in handheld mode. So I hope that answered your question as well. And I hope you guys enjoyed my answers to this week's viewer questions. And I hope you enjoyed this episode of Touch Base as a whole. I know this was a bulky one. It was a hot topic. We had a great sponsor. I really had a good time putting this one together. So as always, if you want to catch the next episode of Touch Base, it'll be right back here on the YouTube channel. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss it. Hit that notification bell while you're there as well. And if you want to check out the show, we are also available on lots of other platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. These episodes are uploaded there as well. Of course, if you liked anything I had to say, leave a like on the video, drop a subscribe, and until next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Nakam!